This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our advocacy information session. We are so happy to have you with us. We're going to give everyone just 2 or 3 more minutes to join. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and would love to know where you're joining us from. Anything you'd like to learn today, feel free to say hello there. Good afternoon, everyone. We know there's a few more people joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started as we want to make sure to keep this program to an hour. So thank you again, everyone, for being here and joining us today and your interest in our advocacy work. Again, for those who just joined, if you want to share in the chat where you're joining us from, that would be great. And if you have any questions, you can also put those in the chat. If you have a private question, you're in need of services, we're here to help. Feel free to use the Q&A feature, or you can also always call our 24/7 helpline, which we will touch on later. So all participants are muted. This info session is being recorded. And again, you can use the chat to introduce yourself, comment, make conversation, ask questions. We'd love for you to be engaged throughout the session. And today we're going to be covering a few different things. We're going to do some quick introductions. We will briefly cover our mission and our programs and services here at the association. Then we are going to talk about why advocacy matters, how we advocate, what that looks like. And then we will get into a little bit about our policy priorities. And we're really excited to have several of our wonderful advocates with us to participate in a panel today and tell you more about what advocacy looks like for them, why they advocate, and how then you can be involved. So yeah, that's what we will be covering today. So I just want to tell you a little bit about our public policy team here for the Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapter. I'm Chelsea Gordon. I am the director of public policy here, and it's an honor to do this work and to work with advocates. As probably for many of you, and I know for many of our advocates, this is personal for me. My grandmother and aunt both had Alzheimer's. You are going to hear from both Lainey and Jessica today as well. Lainey is our public policy and advocacy manager, and Jessica is our senior public policy manager. They are both wonderful. Excited for you all to hear from them, and they are both relatively new to our team. So we are so lucky to have them, and both of them bring experiences from other nonprofits. And our entire team has actually worked at either the Massachusetts State House or the New Hampshire State House. So we are just so lucky to have them join the team. You're also going to hear from 4 of our wonderful and dedicated advocates today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves later and tell you more about who they are, and they are part of our team as well. So before we get into a lot of information around our policy and advocacy efforts, which I know is why you all are here today, and thank you for being here, I do want to give you an idea of who we are and what we do at the association. I also want to acknowledge that for many of you joining today, you probably have personally experienced Alzheimer's or other dementia, either yourself, within your family, within your community, or your professional work life. So want you to know that we are here for you 24/7, and I'll touch on that in a moment. As you can see here, our vision is a world without Alzheimer's, and until then, we advocate and we are dedicated to expanding research, providing care and support to families going through this terrible disease currently. If you take one thing away from this event, we hope you take more than one thing, but if you take just one thing away, we want you to know that the association is here for you and anyone else you know that is going through Alzheimer's or other dementia, and there's a place for you here. Whether it's with our advocacy efforts or not, or maybe in a support group, there are many volunteer opportunities and support opportunities that fit all sorts of skill sets and availability, and we want you to be a part of this fight to end Alzheimer's. So as I mentioned briefly, the association is here for you 24/7. How we do that is we have a helpline that is staffed by real people, real association employees, some of whom are master's level clinicians. We are lucky to have them. And you can call that number even on Christmas or the middle of the night, and someone will pick up and be there for you with support and resources. We also offer free education programs, support groups, and dementia care consultations. And we can also help you find more community services and resources. Importantly, want to note that all of those services are free. And for anyone here who is involved in our fundraising efforts, thank you. You are the reason that we can offer those for free to families in need. So we also offer, we are also proud to be the largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's research in the world. In New England, we actually have over $25 million invested right now in research projects happening currently. It's a very exciting time in Alzheimer's research, and we do offer other webinars and information around the research that's happening. So if you want to stay up to date on that work, we could fill a whole other hour with research updates. So there's going to be a follow-up email. Make sure to note that you want to learn about our research work. So now that you've had a little bit of an overview of who we are at the association, I'm going to hand it over to Lainey, who is going to talk about why we advocate and how we do that.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. We're really excited to have you. So I want to talk a bit about why we advocate. Alzheimer's disease is one of the most critical public health issues facing our nation. There are more than 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's right now. And barring any effective prevention or treatment methods, then that number will grow to nearly 13 million people by 2050. While Alzheimer's disease places a huge burden on the healthcare system, all of you know that the cost is far more than financial. Over 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementias. These caregivers provided more than 16 billion hours, valued at over $270 billion. So we advocate to improve the quality of care and quality of life for people with Alzheimer's disease and their families. Chelsea, in a little bit, will share some of our legislative successes we've had, and you'll be able to see how these new laws really have an impact on people's lives and make a real difference in their everyday lives for people living with Alzheimer's disease and their families. We also advocate to increase critical research funding through the government. It's so important, again, without any changes to the treatment landscape or prevention methods, this problem is just going to continue to grow. And we advocate to change the trajectory of the disease because honestly, we can't afford not to. And as you'll see in this next slide. So here it again shows the number of people who have Alzheimer's is going to continue to grow, again, without any efforts for treatment and prevention. In 2020, $300 billion went towards the cost of caring for people with Alzheimer's and other dementias, and that includes $202 billion in government spending, so Medicare and Medicaid costs. That will continue to grow, and in 2050, that cost would be $1.14 trillion in cost of society for caring for people with Alzheimer's, and $750 billion in government spending on Medicare and Medicaid. And that's in today's dollars, not counting for inflation. To put that into perspective, the US defense budget for this year was $743 billion, so less than what it would cost to spend on Medicare and Medicaid for people living with Alzheimer's in 2050. So really, the US can't afford not to make this change and not have public policy changes to change the course of this disease. And obviously families can't really keep up with the status quo. So how do we advocate? The most important thing we can do is share stories with lawmakers and other advocates. No one, or most of our advocates, I'm sure maybe some, but not most of our advocates were public policy experts when they signed up to become an advocate. Unfortunately, and even if you might not want to be, you are an expert in Alzheimer's and in your lived experience. It's so important for your lawmakers and members of Congress, state legislators, to understand what you've gone through so they really see the scope and the scale of the Alzheimer's crisis. It's so important and really can make such a difference. So we advocate by sharing those stories. And we also increase awareness of the disease and provide facts, information, and constituent resources. And we do that because members of Congress often will hear from their constituents, state legislators as well, when they are faced with a challenge. And if those staff members have information from the Alzheimer's Association, for example, our 24/7 helpline, they can really provide that much needed help and support to people impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And finally, we develop sincere relationships with our legislators, the members of Congress or the legislative members in the state, as well as their staff members. We obviously can't be with them 24/7, reminding them to change policies that affect Alzheimer's, but if they have these relationships with us, they remember your stories, they're going to remember you when something comes across their desk that impacts the community, and they're going to be more willing to understand the change that needs to happen. So why specifically do we need you to advocate? I'm sure that the people on this call, even though you have experiences with Alzheimer's and dementia, none of you have had the same experience. Each experience is unique. And again, we need legislators to understand that, to really see all of the different parts of the problem and to understand really the scope of it and why things need to change. So you're such a valuable resource and can create those personal connections with your elected officials. And those stories, again, can create the positive change we need to see happen. So sometimes people will ask, why wouldn't a member of Congress or an elected representative in the state legislature, why wouldn't they want to support people living with Alzheimer's or their family caregivers? So it's not always a matter of not wanting to do it, but it could be just a matter of not being aware of an issue. So this here shows what influences members of Congress when a bill is before them. And this congressional session, which started in January 2021, is going to January 2023, so a couple more months. There were 16,000 bills introduced in Congress. So it's very difficult for members of Congress or their staff to be aware of every single thing that's been filed in Congress. It's our job as their constituents to bring those things to their desk, to let them know what's been introduced and why it's important. And that's really part of our jobs, to make sure that we're bringing those issues forward so that they're aware of them and can care about them and take action on them. So this here shows that in-person visits from constituents, which a little note here that this survey was done before COVID. So this doesn't count Zoom meetings, which I still count as face-to-face meetings. But the in-person visits with constituents, 97% of congressional staff said that they had a lot of positive influence or some influence on a legislator's decision-making process on a piece of legislation. It's so important. As you can see, it's the most influential thing that can happen with a member of Congress. Chelsea, Jessica, and I can go and meet with staff, or different lobbyists can do that. But as you can see, it's not as impactful as you meeting with them. Someone in their district, a constituent of theirs, who lives in their area, who could tell them the experience they're having and why the policy needs to change. So what will you do as an advocate? We'll ask you to share your story. You'll be asked to communicate with different elected officials, and we do that in a variety of ways. It can be petitions, emails, phone calls, meetings, and other calls to action throughout the year. And we'll send you regular updates about those legislative and public policy issues. So starting in January, there'll be a new legislative session, both in the Massachusetts and New Hampshire state houses. So we'll share with you about what we'll be working on in the coming year. And we'll get those updates out to you so you can be aware of what's happening and any chance to take action. And then we'll invite you again to participate in any sort of events or meetings we have around Alzheimer's advocacy. And sharing your stories with other advocates to also make them aware of the different challenges. Again, every experience is unique, so sharing your story with legislators and other advocates can really make a difference. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the different advocacy roles. You'll hear about some of these things as you become more involved in our advocacy efforts. So we have congressional teams, and the Alzheimer's Association around the country has these in each congressional district. And that would be a team of advocates who are tasked with making sure their member of Congress is aware of our priorities in Congress and can meet with them and send them information to ask for their support. So if you were to join a congressional team, that's what we'd ask you to do. You would meet with the members of Congress or their staff. We would invite you to bring new volunteers onto the team from your congressional district and generally just spread the word about the association. Soon we'll be hearing from some of our amazing ambassadors for the different congressional districts in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And so those folks are some experienced advocates who are the volunteer lead for teams, and they coordinate the team's activities. And then the congressional team members, which would be what you would be if you chose to join us, you would support those team activities, share your stories, and then offer any unique skills you might have. For example, if someone is very good at sharing things on social media, they could bring those skills to the congressional team. Then we also have state policy advocates who would attend our state advocacy days. We have those both for Massachusetts and New Hampshire every year, and you can share your stories with state legislators to advance those policies that we introduce in the state legislatures. And the key point here is that these are not mutually exclusive. You can do both of these things. You can do one of these things. Really, if you have time to spend tons of hours on advocacy, that's wonderful. If you have time to send one email, that's wonderful too. We really are happy to take whatever time you can dedicate to doing this. And, if it's just one thing to start and something more later, that's great. But we really can just, whatever you can give us and whatever you can offer to the program, we're just grateful for. So just to drive home the point about your story and how important it is, tell me a fact and I'll learn, tell me a truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. And we really see this with congressional staff, legislative staff at the state houses. They hear the stories from advocates and they remember them. They ask us about them and how they're doing. So it's just so important and can really make such an impact on our public policy issues. So now I'm so pleased to introduce to all of you Joe Montminy, and Joe is one of our amazing Massachusetts advocates. Joe is living with Alzheimer's, and he has been so involved in forwarding our cause. He was served on the Massachusetts New Hampshire chapter board of the Alzheimer's Association, and now is on the National Board of Directors. He's also on the Alzheimer's Advisory Council for the federal government. So really keeping busy and doing all sorts of great things. So thank you, Joe, so much for being here, and I'll let you share your story.
Hi, thanks, Lainey. And thank you very much for the introduction. Just to introduce myself, as Lainey mentioned, Joe Montminy. I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I thought it'd be helpful to kind of share a little of my history before I get into my advocacy work. And just to give you a little perspective, as Lainey mentioned, I was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's in 2017 when I was 54 years old. And a few years earlier, I began noticing that I was having probably more difficulties at work. And having to work much longer hours to compensate. So I went to see my neurologist, who did a variety of different tests and came back and said, Joe, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have younger onset Alzheimer's disease. And I'll be honest, I wasn't prepared for that. So you kind of go through all these different stages of grieving. At least I did, and I know many others do as well. You got the shock, the denial, frustration when you think about, these different life events you're going to miss out on. And I tell you that because it took me a few years before I could kind of really get grounded with what this was going to mean, how I was going to deal with it, and how I accepted the diagnosis. But once I came to terms with that, I decided, you know what? I wanted to get more involved with advocacy, but I'll be honest with you, I'd never done advocacy before in my life. So I started from ground zero with not a lot of, I don't want to say confidence, but I just wasn't sure what it was going to take. So I decided I'm going to start really slowly. And so since I didn't know what to expect. And so I went with Chelsea to a meeting with Congressman Keating's office. Then I also went and did some meetings with our local state reps and started feeling more comfortable, realizing, you know what, this isn't that difficult. So I started getting more comfortable. And so I started doing speaking engagements where I would speak to people living with the disease, just to let them know what it's like, to live with it. And then I started speaking at conferences, talking about what it's like to live with the disease. And my advocacy efforts grew from there. But I want to stress kind of something Lainey mentioned, and that is one of the best parts I found about advocacy is you can get involved as much as you want. but even getting involved a little makes a big difference. And Lainey, if you could pull the slide up that I sent you, because one of the things I've seen through the different involvement that I have is it's a lot more impactful when we have more than just a couple of people involved. And you can do it full screen. They don't need to see me for this. But it's more impactful when we have more than just 2 or 3 people going into these meetings. This picture that Lainey has on the slide is from this summer. And as you can see, the picture on the left was with Senator Markey. We had a great turnout, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and energy from that meeting. A few days later, we had a meeting with Congressman Keating, and it was a really good meeting. But just think about the impression that each congressman got coming away from this meeting, where one, you've got a large group of people talking about how important this is to them, and another one where you've got 3 or 4. And Congressman was great, he was great, but I just was left away thinking, wow, I'm just not sure he got the same impression. And I think it's important that they realize that there's more than just a few of us impacted by that. And the more that can come to these meetings and share, even if you just go to show your support and not speak a lot, or if you want, you can share your story so they can better understand the challenges that we're facing. Or sometimes Chelsea will say, you know what, if you're comfortable, ask them to support an upcoming bill on an issue that is important to us. I think one of the important things that I've realized, and Lainey, I'm all set, you can take it down now. One of the important things that I've learned through my interactions with both the state and federal Congress people is that they want to hear our story. You know, they actually take the time to listen, engage, and understand our issues. And I was surprised and thrilled to see that what we're doing truly makes a difference. And you know, it's something that somebody told me once that really sticks with me is they said, you know what, Joe, you know what, if you're not out there talking to them, then they're listening to somebody else. And it's important to realize how much of a difference we can make. And I think that slide that Lainey showed earlier, but on the survey showing that for the Congress people, hearing from their constituents matters. That I've truly seen that to make a difference. And that's something I think, just think about as you think about, do you want to get involved? If you realize you're really going to make a difference, it truly helps. And I also wanted to share quickly how I've seen how work from prior advocates has made a huge difference. I actually had an opportunity to speak with Harry Johns, the CEO of the Alzheimer's Association. You know, he told me that we've been able to grow federal funding for Alzheimer's research from 500 million to 3.6 billion over the last 10 years, you know, due to the advocacy work of many individuals across our country. You know, and Lainey is going to share with details of this in just a minute, or Chelsea, I'm not sure which one. But the important thing is our voices have helped politicians in the federal government realize more needed to be done to fight Alzheimer's disease, and it's working. I'm just going to share with you some concrete examples of the difference it's making. There's growing research showing that there are risk factors that we can control that can reduce our chances of getting dementia. You know, I saw in the chat that Diane from Wilmington, Mass. wanted a little bit more information about that. Well, Diane, we don't have time to get into this today, but reach out to Chelsea or myself because we have information that talks about what are those risk factors that we could control to reduce our chances of getting dementia. Also, there are biomarkers that can help clinicians determine who has the Alzheimer's genes and who might be at risk of developing Alzheimer's or in the early stages of the disease. You know, and for those individuals that are at risk, but maybe not showing any signs, they can manage those modifiable risk factors. Or for those of us in the very early stages, you know, we can get into clinical trials sooner and potentially determine which trials might be best for us or most appropriate. That would help us and the researchers. You know, and the pharmaceutical companies are close to coming up with drugs that can slow down the progression of this disease. You know, there's one that's been submitted to the FDA that looks very promising, and another one that's up for review in the next year with dozens more behind them. All of this has the potential to change the trajectory of this disease. But we're at an inflection point. We're just at the beginning of all this. You know, we need you to help us keep this momentum going. You know, your voice matters. You know, so I'm just going to wrap up by just telling you a little bit about some of my favorite parts of being an advocate. And one of the most important ones is how good it feels knowing, you that I'm making a difference with a disease that's so traumatic to those of us impacted by it, and our families. How sharing my story with others lets them know, they're not alone, that there are resources that can help them. You're hearing from legislators say that they value our stories and how it impacts the legislation that they vote on. And probably for me, I found it to be very therapeutic because talking about my situation has helped me better deal with it. I found people and resources along the way that have helped me. I think if you were to get involved, become an advocate, you might find some of these same benefits. And it really, really feels good. Anyways, that's it, Lainey. Just wanted to share with you my perspective of being an advocate. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I think I speak for everyone here today that you're an amazing advocate. And I think it's always an honor for all of us to hear from you and learn from you and hear about your experiences. I hope you can see there's a lot of support coming in for you in the chat, a lot of gratitude to you for sharing your story. So yes, thank you again for all you do. So now that we have this moving story from Joe and a sense of what the association does, why and how we advocate, I'm going to give you all an idea of what we are advocating for. I know Joe mentioned several things there, so we don't need to go too far into all of this today, but this is just hopefully everyone can see this slide here. This is a graph of some of the amazing work that our advocates have accomplished. So if you're looking at this number moving down the screen, this is the Alzheimer's research funding that the federal government allocates every year to the National Institutes of Health. And Joe touched on this before. So as he spoke about, we have made a lot of progress in increasing research funding. And our advocates have really done this work. People like Joe, people like you all have worked tirelessly to see that number rise dramatically. So as Joe said, it was under $500 million in 2011. And in 2022, it has hit $3.5 billion. So it's a dramatic and significant impact on research, which I know probably all of us here today are very committed to seeing research be expanded and accelerated on Alzheimer's and other dementia. And as probably we all know, we still need much more research, more effective treatments, more prevention methods, although we are learning more and more about prevention and risk reduction, as Joe spoke about as well. And hopefully, I think, the end goal one day, a cure, so that all families will not have to go through this. And so we will continue to advocate until that day comes. So we also advocate for change, not only for research funding, but also for public policy. And it was briefly spoken about, actually, if you go back one, Lainey, I just want to touch on, there's been several bills that have passed. That's if you see the words next to different years there, I won't go into all of those, don't worry, but I do want to just touch on that first one, the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which it was mentioned that Joe is a member of the advisory council, which is incredible. So in the United States, this was really the first landmark federal law that passed. It was signed into law in 2011, and the act called for coordinated national efforts around Alzheimer's disease. And it really recognized that Alzheimer's is a public health crisis, and that we need to do more. We need to build out this federal infrastructure to address Alzheimer's and other dementia, and make sure we have a national plan, the advisory council, and that we're continually working on this in an organized way. So a lot has come out of that, including the ability for our advocates to head to the Hill every year, whether in district or on Capitol Hill, and ask for more research funding and other legislation that you see listed here. So just wanted to mention that huge success, and many thanks to our advocates for making that happen, and all that's come from that. So I'm going to get into just a few of our current federal priorities today. So just to give you all an idea of what do we work on now, as you saw, we've gotten a lot done, but more needs to happen, more needs to get done. So the Bipartisan Comprehensive Care for Alzheimer's Act would ask the federal government to test a different payment structure for dementia care management. And this bill really works to streamline today's complicated healthcare system for people living with Alzheimer's and their caregivers. It makes sure that families and family caregivers who are so key to those living with Alzheimer's or other dementia are thought of in the healthcare system. And it works to increase quality of care and bring down healthcare costs, and make sure that people living with Alzheimer's feel fully supported and have a healthcare team really wrapped around them. So we're really excited about that bill. Our advocates are working hard on that. Also want to touch on the Equity in Neuroscience and Alzheimer's Clinical Trials Act. So this bill works to increase the participation of underrepresented populations in Alzheimer's and other dementia clinical trials by expanding education and outreach to these populations, encouraging diversity for clinical trial staff, and reducing the burden on participating in a clinical trial, among other things. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's impacts people of color at a higher rate. If you, as an example, if you are a Black American, you are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's than a white American. And we are committed to increasing awareness on this and also ensuring that there is more equity in clinical trials and across the healthcare system, to make sure that people of color and diverse communities are getting the support and access to care that they need. Alzheimer's Caregiver Support Act. Lainey touched on this, but there's an estimated 11 million Americans right now providing unpaid care to someone living with dementia. It's an enormous population that needs support. As probably many of you know who are joining us today, the burden on the caregiving burden is high, and it's only higher after these last few years in the pandemic. We are aware of that. As I touched on in the beginning, we offer many services to reduce that burden, but it's still really, really hard work. So we want to make sure that as a nation, we are recognizing that. And through this bill, we would provide, the federal government would make sure that there's more respite care, more training, and more education there to support caregivers. And then we've talked a lot about federal research funding. Continued priority is always to increase the federal research dollars, and then also to build out our nation's public health infrastructure across the country, and make sure that there's funding for that to address Alzheimer's. So similar to our federal policy work, we also work in all 50 state capitals across the country. And these are just some of our current state priorities. So this goes for whether you would be advocating as an advocate in Concord, New Hampshire, or in Boston. You would be working around all of these issues of increasing access to care at the state level, improving quality of care, advancing risk reduction, diagnosis, early detection, and then ensuring that both of our states, in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, are really addressing at a coordinated state level that and recognizing that Alzheimer's is a public health crisis in these states. As an example of some of the ways we have worked on those goals, and again, we would need longer to get into, every single bill that we have worked on and supported in both states. But just to give you an idea, in Massachusetts in 2018, there was a landmark law passed that many of our advocates worked very hard on. And it has now become a national model for state policy to address Alzheimer's, which is really exciting. And so it put into place a state plan, a state advisory council that is permanent and will continue to address Alzheimer's in Massachusetts. Some of our advocates actually serve on that advisory council, which is pretty awesome. And then it also put into place some much needed training for physicians. As we know, people living with Alzheimer's and dementia, it's also often very hard for them to get a diagnosis. Also put into place some other training requirements for various professionals who work with those living with Alzheimer's or family caregivers. And it did a couple other things as well. In New Hampshire, just last year, we were able to pass those bills that you're seeing on the screen there. So we were able to expand respite care to family caregivers. We were able to put into place some protections for vulnerable adults, which includes those living with dementia from financial exploitation. We know that financial abuse, unfortunately, is common, and you are at higher risk if you are living with dementia. And then we were able to increase reimbursement rates for nursing homes, which we hope will translate to increased quality of care. So those are just some of the things that our advocates in Massachusetts and New Hampshire have worked at the state level. As you can see, we are getting things done, and it's so important that you are with us and at our state capitals so we can get even more done. So with that, I would love to bring on a few of our wonderful, amazing advocates who work so hard for the association and what we are trying to accomplish. So I'm going to let them tell you more about their stories and how they advocate. But I want to briefly just let you know that the advocates joining us are Kathy Harvard. She is the ambassador to Senator Hassan in New Hampshire. She is also a chair of one of our walks in New Hampshire, and we are so lucky to have her. Judy Johansson is a longtime advocate, has done amazing things at the association. She is the ambassador to Senator Warren. She's also serves on our board of directors. Thank you, Judy, for being here. And Hector Montesino is the ambassador to Congresswoman Clark. He is also the vice president of our board and works tirelessly to ensure that we are in every room we can be to advocate for those living with Alzheimer's or other dementia. So welcome, Kathy, Judy, and Hector. I think we are going to take the slides down. Hector, if you could turn your camera on when you can, that would be great. And if you're having trouble doing that, let us know, and maybe we can troubleshoot with you. So I just want to start by asking you all, why did you get involved with advocacy volunteering?
So, hi, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm Kathy Harvard, and I'm talking to you from Hanover, New Hampshire, and so glad to have you all here today. My story is like a lot of you who are listening today. I was the caregiver for my husband, who suffered from younger onset Alzheimer's, like Joe, for more than a decade, and my young children and I supported him in his decade-long journey. I sometimes describe this as this was the party that nobody wanted to be invited to, but we were there and we stayed for the party. And so that's what we did. And that's what caregivers do, of course. And so that's what this is about. We're all at the party together. So as all of you who have been on this road know, this is about facing hurdles and challenges every step of the way. Every time you get over one hurdle, getting a diagnosis, it morphs into something else, and it's a new challenge to learn about. Whether it's learning how to navigate the medical system, which does not have adequate training, is ill-equipped, and really just not set up at this point to navigate the demands right now of 6+ million persons with Alzheimer's. So therefore, it's one of the pieces of legislation that Chelsea just talked about, how to streamline legislation at the national level, which will have an impact not only user friendliness for the persons with the disease, but their caregivers. And by the way, for the medical system, it will save money, which is something in this very, very costly disease we need to be cognizant of. Financial realities. There's not a caregiver out there who has not struggled with this in the middle of the night, wondering how to juggle caregiving, wondering how to juggle medical bills, wondering how to find assistance with caregiving, and particularly if we're talking younger onset, where we're not even Medicare eligible. So over the years I've worked on, I been happy to be able to work on some federal policies that have made a difference to make sure that those folks with younger onset have access to the same kinds of Medicare services that are available to older folks with Alzheimer's. So my point is when you think, well, how does it fit for me? Every single thing I've ever been involved with federally or at state level has had a connection to me and my family, and it made it very easy for me to be involved. The other hurdles, of course, were finding community level and state level and federal resources that could help me and my family in our caregiving journey, and finding that those resources were just not there, and realizing there were ways that we could do something about this. And so I had 10 years to think about, to formulate ideas, to learn about what were the gaps in our system, and to really systematically think, how could we move forward to do something about that? Look, I realized my experience was mine and my family's, but I was not alone. I was like all the rest of you out there, all across the country. We're facing these very same issues and working together, just as Joe described. We could, in fact, begin making those changes one by one that would make a huge difference in the quality of life for persons with the disease, for their caregivers who are doing their very best, and to support research efforts that will finally get us to the end of this true public health crisis. So that is why I started working on public policy and advocacy. And again, as little or as much as you're able, it's very satisfying, but you will find it is intimately and directly related to everything that you've already experienced in your own lives.
Thank you, Kathy. And you are an amazing advocate at that. So we're lucky to have you. Judy, would love to learn from you too.
Sure. I would just like to say that I identify as many different things in life, and those are a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, a board member, as you mentioned, Chelsea, on our board of directors. But probably most profoundly, I identify as having been the wife of the most wonderful person, Steve, and eventually the steward of his care when he was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's at age 59. He lived with that disease for 6.5 years. Steve and I sought everything that we could from the Alzheimer's Association. They were our guide. They helped us through the care, cause, and cure mission and gave us a purpose along the way. Steve passed away in 2018 at age 65. Since then, both of his parents have died from Alzheimer's, and I have 2 grown children and 4 amazing grandchildren. And this is a family tradition that I do not want to pass down to our next generations. And this advocacy gives me a chance to help out in that way.
Thank you so much. And I know that both of your husbands will be very proud of all the work you both do. So thank you for your advocacy. Kathy and then Judy, if you could both tell us a little bit about, clearly you're both passionate and wonderful advocates. If you could just share with us a little bit about, what does advocacy volunteering really look like? I think for many people, it can feel a little intimidating, or what does this really look like to advocate? So if you could share a little bit with us, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because, it's really, advocacy is really, just breaks down to this. It's your voice, it's your words, it's your heart, and your story. That's really all it is. And just being there, whether it's a conversations with one person, or whether it's in a local state representative's office where you're educating them, or whether it's with your senator and their aides, or whether it's walking around our Capitol with a purple Alzheimer's badge on, and people can see that there is really this wave of people who are affected and have something to say. You can be part of all this and you can contribute, but exactly as Joe said, you can do as much or you can do as little as you might like to do. And so I'm going to give you an example of one thing that I did. Again, I talked just a moment ago about how this was important to me and how it translated completely to my own story. 2 weeks after my husband passed in 2019, I participated for the very first time. I'd written statements before, but I participated in our state capitol in Concord, talking about what turned out to be a very contentious bill. I couldn't understand why it would be contentious, but it turned out that New Hampshire is one of the only remaining states out of all the rest of the country. 47 states had passed a training requirement, a basic training requirement that anybody with hands-on work with a person with Alzheimer's would have some basic education in dementia care. And it was not an easy thing to get through. It took 3 or 4 trips to Concord and repeated testimony. That was a tough one. Last year, it was not that tough. But let me tell you, I felt every bit of that bill, because everything that I wrote and everything I said came out of my heart and from my experience. And I thought, gosh, my husband did the hard work and he lost the battle, but I can honor him by making sure that these lawmakers will hear this and listen to me, and we got it passed. And so can I just tell you that that was so enormously satisfying to me. So it doesn't matter whether it's meeting with Senator Hassan and her staff, or being part of a national coalition of people at our federal advocacy forums, or meeting with other folks from New Hampshire on Advocacy Day in our capital, or meeting with folks in my town, where I will write a letter to the editor, or I'll offer to speak whenever somebody wants somebody to talk about Alzheimer's. There are all ways to use tools that, it is true, we do have enough experience to talk about this. So that is what it looks like to me. And may I say, we had an opportunity in 2018 to be part of the lead up to the 2020 presidential election. And we will again, as the field was vetted with who was going to be the Democratic representative. They all came, because we're an early primary state, they all came here to present. And there were advocates at each one of those household meetings or town halls or parades or whatever, wherever they happen to be, those representatives. And it was a way to say, they're hearing my story, they're hearing our story, and maybe this gets elevated to their platform as a potential presidential candidate. And boy, was that satisfying. So I will gonna say that I get as much as I give, and you give as much as you're able, and it all works.
Thank you, Kathy. That's so helpful. Judy?
Kathy, that's so profound and powerful, your testimony to why you advocate and how you advocate. I'm going to go at it a little more from a visceral angle of what it meant for Steve and I. I mean, we were not politically well-versed or well-read, but we were invited by the Alzheimer's Association to advocate, and we weren't really sure, if it was the thing for us, but we started getting involved. And what we found was what voice Steve was losing in this disease, he was regaining and found a platform through advocacy. His story mattered to the people we told. He was, I like to say, he was a 6'2" handsome Viking that no one could, not listen to. But his story was remembered because he took that step to go. And whether he told it or I told it while he sat by me, people listened. And being involved in advocacy, I found also was felt like being part of a large support group. We literally walk arm in arm. We hold each other's hands. We dry each other's tears. We know what is at stake because we're all experiencing it. I work a full-time job. I don't have a lot of time to give to this, but the Alzheimer's Association, Chelsea and Laney, They make sure I have what I need so that my time commitment can be what I can afford. And I have my notes because I get passionate about this and emotional. In the face of a disease where we were told basically there's nothing that you can do, this is what we could do. This is what we did do. This is what we did do together, even when it was a time when it was harder to do things at the same pace together. Steve and I, when we began advocating, as you heard earlier, the funding was at a little bit below 500 million. Through these years of advocacy, I've watched that raise to 3.5 billion now. That's how I know it mattered. That's how I know that these grandchildren that I have are going to be the generation where Alzheimer's is nothing but a memory. This is a legacy that Steve and I could make together. And I would invite and encourage anybody to do it at whatever pace you can, because it's well worth the while.
Thank you both. I think you both hit on some really important parts there of, you don't have to be a policy or political expert. You don't even have to like politics, but you just need to know your story. You are an expert on your story, which Lainey talked about before. And that's what we need. We just need you, when you can, to show up and tell your story. And I loved how you both spoke about sort of what you get out of it and that it gives you purpose. And we do, I personally love this, that I do feel that there's a community here of advocates. And if any of you on this call join us in this fight, we know you will have a community of support. We don't do these meetings alone. As Lainey said, you have a team. And I think that we really do, our advocates do a really good job of being teammates to one another in this. So thank you for all those wonderful points you both made. And just wanted to close with, and you might have, some of you there, you've touched on this a little bit before, but what is your favorite part of advocating, and what do you want to leave everyone with today of why you would encourage them to get involved in this fight and advocacy work?
Okay, I'd love to jump in. I'm just going to echo what you've just said, and that is that we're busy people. We live in different places, but we share a common experience that is almost beyond words. And so when I'm able to join with other advocates, I may not know a whole lot about the rest of their lives, but I know a big piece of their lives that we don't even have to talk about very much. And that fills some holes for me. It lets me know that I have a team there of people who understand very well what my world has been, and I understand what their world has been, and we're doing something together. It's very extremely satisfying. So I guess I want to say, when I started on this journey, this Alzheimer's journey with my husband, I have to say that I felt alone, I felt scared, and I wondered how to manage. How was I going to move forward? Alzheimer's Association programs and education gave me most of the education and content that I needed. But what happened, I would say that by engaging with the public policy and advocacy folks, I learned how I could fight back against this disease. And what I mean by that is, in the early days, in fact, I know I felt like a victim. Why did this happen to me? How can I do this? And feeling that I had not disempowered, frankly. Working in whatever capacity I could with other people from very different walks of life, but people who shared this same bond, I realized I was not disempowered. I was not a victim. I had a way to be a voice, and I had a way to fight back. And so I guess what I want to say is, I don't see us now being at a party that none of us wanted to be invited to. That's where we got into the door, right? But now I see us as an army of people, of volunteers all across the country who understand this disease to our bones and understand why it is so critical, whether it's for Judy's grandchildren or my grandchildren or our families or our national budget. we have to do something. And so together, whatever we can do, we will, and we are making a huge difference. So that's exactly why I like to advocate, and what it gives to me. It gives me the ability to fight back, and it gives me the ability to make a difference. So jump in. We need some more foot soldiers.
And Chelsea, I like to recall the story, the one time when we were in an advocacy event, and there were 4 of us who were just kind of as a group from support group, and our 4 husbands had Alzheimer's, and they were in their shirts and ties and sitting in a lobby waiting for us for meeting. And we looked at them and we thought, they're no longer in boardrooms or at meetings for work, but they're sitting here together, dressed and doing important work. They know that their story matters. They are not losing everything with this disease, not while they'll open their mouths or show up to tell their story. And I think the other important thing, and is one of my favorite thing, is the power of many. You know, we use the imagery of light all the time. You know, a single candle is only a single candle, but many candles join is a bonfire, and it can lead the way. So I have had some of the most special interactions with people that I have advocated with. And I look forward to having additional ones with more people who may join us. So come, bring your candle, come on.
Thank you so much, Judy and Kathy. Frankly, I've heard them both speak many times, and they're still successful at leaving me kind of speechless. I feel like you both are just such amazing people and advocates, and you are truly doing incredible work for your families and so many other families. So thank you both for being here today and for raising your voice. So with that, even though Kathy and Judy also are successful, always making me emotional because they are so amazing. But we do know we are at the top of the hour here, and I'm also seeing a lot of support coming in through the chat for you both. So thank you both. And for anyone who does have just 5 more minutes, we are just going to wrap up here and learn a few more things and next steps from Jessica. And if anyone does have to go, you will get an email from us. Don't worry. So thank you all for being here. And a special thank you to Judy and Kathy and Joe for telling your stories today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. And I'd like to just reiterate, echo those sentiments. It's such an honor to be here in this space with these advocates doing this incredible work and sharing their stories. So thank you so much. So a little bit about organizationally the Alzheimer's Impact Movement. Functionally, this is the political arm, sort of sister organization to the association. And what this does is really, in a very special way, allows the association to be in spaces with candidates, with elected officials that are traditionally considered political or electoral arenas that are sometimes not a possibility for nonprofit organizations. So AIM lets us be in the room with decision makers. It gets advocates, it gets policy staff and volunteers in the rooms talking to people making the decisions and really advancing our agendas. As was alluded to earlier, Kathy mentioned New Hampshire is the first in the nation presidential primary state. And what that does really, in a nuanced way, it gives us unprecedented access to both elected officials as well as candidates coming through to campaign. It lets us engage, at house parties, in living rooms in a very intimate way to tell these stories, make these introductions, and ensure that for folks returning to office or seeking office, that these issues and our policy priorities are really top of mind for them. And here you'll see AIM this was based on a survey that AIM did of elected officials, obviously, across the political spectrum. And the great thing about this issue is that it knows no boundaries. It doesn't know party lines, socioeconomic status. And so it's not a red or a blue issue. It's truly a purple issue. And we will work with any elected official, anyone in a position to make decisions and enhance our work and the lived experiences of folks living with Alzheimer's and related dementia. We'll work with anyone who is committed to this work, and it's truly heartening to see, especially in times that can be so polarizing, there is strong bipartisan support for increasing research funding for Alzheimer's at the federal level. So some different ways to get involved. As has been referenced, we will take any and all energy, skills, willingness to participate that you bring to the table. This can be as simple as calling, emailing, tweeting your legislators, making your voice heard. They really need to hear from their constituents, from the voters and the folks they represent, what issues are important to you and what they need you to be focusing on. And so this can be an incredible, impactful, and relatively light lift way to interact with these decision makers. Consider joining the Alzheimer's Impact Movement. This will get you plugged into a lot of resources, updates, information that we're constantly pushing out to keep you abreast of what's going on, what we're working on at the state and federal levels, as well as different ways you can plug in and get involved that really meet you where you're at. Consider joining an Alzheimer's congressional team. This is a really great way to get involved. You'll be plugged in with a congressional ambassador and work directly, really forging and fostering relationships with our congressional members. As has been said, sharing personal stories. I mean, we can, as policy staff, we can talk to them all day long, and that's great. But with all due respect to us, we're not who they want to hear from. They want to sit down with you and hear about your experience. You know, we've heard you don't have to be a policy expert in order to sit in on these meetings. Who they really want to hear from are folks who are experts in their own lived experience and the experience of their loved ones. Those are the stories that stick with them, that really ignite their passion and what they think of on the floor when they're casting their vote. We would love to have you join us at New Hampshire or Massachusetts State Advocacy Days. Those will be coming up in the spring of next year. And it's a really great opportunity to come together as a team and to either go to the Capitol, or depending on sort of what the landscape looks like in the next few months, whether it's virtual or in person. This is a great way to engage our locally and state elected officials, to engage with them, show our presence, and really underline for them just how important these issues are. I mean, they may not have as many bills introduced as Congress, but certainly they have a lot on their plates, and they do rely on folks, boots on the ground, really committed to this effort to bring these issues to the front of their mind. And consider attending a meeting with state or federal legislators. To that same point, we're always welcoming folks into the fold who want to share their stories and really use their voices as a way to empower themselves and their loved ones and their families. Again, these experiences, you know, as painful as they are and horrible, they are authentic, and they are what elected officials really need to be hearing. It's not just a white sheet or a piece of paper. These are living, breathing, lived experiences that they need to and they want to learn about. And I know we're running short on time, so additional volunteer opportunities. Again, we will be following up with a whole bunch of support materials, information, and resources for you all, and certainly plenty of information about all of these options for volunteer opportunities. But I think the one thing really that's important to take away from today is there is a way for you to become involved, no matter how much time you have to give, how much bandwidth. You know, everybody is very busy with full lives. That's totally understood. But we will meet you wherever you're at and plug you into advocating and lifting up your voice. There are lots of opportunities. And if you don't see something that works for you, we will work with you to find something that fits, because there is certainly room for everyone at this table, and we need all the support we can get. So thank you so much again for being here. Like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email, a ton of supportive informational materials, as well as a survey. We would really welcome and appreciate any feedback you have about today's program, takeaways, things you might have liked to hear more about. That will certainly help us tailor these sessions in the future to ensure we're meeting your needs. And we'll be following up regarding interests, how we can get involved, and additional opportunities for you to take action. And again, you know, the recurring theme today, show up, speak out, join the fight. We need all hands on deck. And we are so grateful that all of you took the time to be here today, and hope to work with you more in the future.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm echoing now, but just wanted to thank everyone for being here. I know we're over time, so we are going to end the program here. If you have questions, don't worry, we are going to do individual follow-ups with every single person who registered and attended today. In the chat, you will see a survey, and you will also receive an email from someone on our team by tomorrow. And just know that we so appreciate you being here, and we hope you get involved. Thank you so much for joining us today.